Well, good evening, everybody. I'm David Gosling, and I'm pleased to welcome you to tonight's Peak and Northern online talk. And tonight we welcome Cassa Townsend, who's the Public Engagement Officer with CPRE. And she's going to be talking about the work of CPRE, the Council for Protection of Rural England, and in particular about the Boundary Walk. So thank you for being here with us. Cassa, over to you.
As David says, I'm Cassa Townsend. I'm here to talk about both the work of CPRE, the countryside charity, Peak District and South Yorkshire branch, but specifically the Peak District Boundary Walk. I will start just quickly by saying I haven't walked it all, so I'm not going to be taking you step by step through it. Those are my walking boots on a wall recently. I think I've got them the wrong way around, which is possibly how they end up on my feet now and again. It feels like it anyway. So what I'm going to cover, I will do a little introduction to myself and my role, a little bit of brief history of CPRE. I'm sure some of you know this already, and the Peak District Boundary Walk itself, and the wider work of the charity as well. Briefly cover that. I'm going to take a look at who is walking the Peak District Boundary Walk route, have a closer look at that. I have to say I do have more slides of people than of landscape. So I'm not going to apologise for that. My role is all around engagement. I like the people pictures. And we're told as well that, you know, trying to raise awareness and using digital engagement, which I'll touch on, we're told that pictures with people in get way more interest than pictures just of the landscape. Might be controversial, but that's what we're kind of told, and it seems to ring true. I will touch briefly on issues along the way, not so much. I won't be delving so much into the technical side, but just touching on that, having a quick chat about the guidebook as well, and then, as I say, time for questions, but do feel free to interrupt as I go through. So my current role is engagement lead for CPRE. CPRE had a national charity kind of rebrand in the last few years. So I have worked for the National CPRE charity for 3 years, up until late last year. And so they're kind of known as the countryside charity. We sort of don't talk so much about campaign to protect rural England anymore, which is interesting, although obviously the ethos and the unique work of CPRE is still there in that sense. Prior to that, I've worked for the Museums Trust in Sheffield, managing volunteering programs and engagement there. I've worked for 2 different wildlife trusts, that's Sheffield and Rotherham, and also the Yorkshire County Wildlife Trust, managing volunteering programs across the county. I worked many years ago for the National Trust as well, out at Hardwick Hall in North East Derbyshire. And I did a stint of 7 years with the Sheffield City Council Parks and Countryside Ranger Service, very much all around getting people up and out and active, volunteering and being involved in particularly green space management and, you know, conservation, volunteering, community engagement, getting people active, and a good dose of fundraising along the way too. So that's me. I will just broadly touch on this slide. It's a potted history of CPRE. I think the person to mention, I'm sure a lot of you will know the name, is Ethel Haythorne-Thwaite, a Sheffielder. So born and bred in Sheffield. She did actually go away to private school, her and her sister, down in London, I believe, but very much a Sheffield and Peak District person, married and very quickly widowed at a young age. Taking long walks in the Peak District with family and then on her own, very much forming a bond with the landscape of the Peak District. So some of those milestones along the way you may be familiar with, leading up to, of course, the designation of the UK's first national park in 1951, the Peak District National Park. So there she is on her horse. Really relevant picture because it is said that she did ride the whole of the boundary of the national park when the boundary was being proposed and drawn up. So looking at not at all, we don't thinking of it as a walking route. You know, that wasn't sort of in the minds of people. It was more about protected areas and legislation to protect the beautiful landscape of Britain. So, but interesting now that we have got the boundary walk, and we look at it as a leisure route. We look at it as something that people do. Besides the landscape of the national park, it's about walking that boundary and going end to end and completing a challenge, as it were. So the boundary walk, as it's known, as it is a concept, was conceived kind of in 2013, 14, 15, 16, and leading up to the launch and publication of the guidebook. I have a copy with me. I won't say much about the guidebook now, but I will touch on that in a later slide. So it's quite a young walking route in that sense. I had a question from somebody recently about whether we're going to push for the boundary walk to be, a designated route on OS mapping. Not as yet. Let's see how that goes. It's a thought. It's a possibility. The book itself was edited by the chair of the Peak National Park, Andrew McCloy. It has a lovely foreword by Dame Fiona Reynolds, who's been active for a long time in green space protection campaigning. She's the current president of our CPRE group, which is wonderful. The run up to the route being, I won't say designated because it doesn't have that sort of legal designation. It's just recognised. It was really created. It was born out of volunteers being involved. Some of yourselves may have been, I'm not sure, but a good host of people walking the route, checking the route, recommending link ups, best ways to walk, what are the nicest ways, how could it be as close to what is the given boundary of the national park as possible while still being accessible, and many of those people still involved with monitoring the accessibility of the route. There was a launch event in the summer of 2017 in June that year in Buxton, because Buxton is seen as the start and end of the walk, although obviously that's subjective. That depends on where you live. The guidebook says 190 miles on the front. We actually believe it to be a little more, 198. It's waymarked along the way, but only in one direction, which again can be it depends which way you want to walk it as to how effective those waymarkers are. So that's the boundary walk in itself. I will just touch briefly on the wider work of the charity, because I just think it's relevant. You may know some of this. CPRE is active in campaigning in all sorts of areas which affect the countryside and green spaces. So there is promotion of active travel, so not being against road building per se, but promoting road building in a sensible way that doesn't have detriment to either people or the environment. So there's a current active campaign around the go-ahead, the green light that's been given by the government for further road building in the West Peak District, east of Manchester. So that's a very active campaign at the moment with a lot of support, I think controversial in some areas, but widely supported too. There is a Sheffield City local plan, which is very recently, the deadline for comment on that was yesterday, outlining the future for Sheffield City environment. So CPRE has given comment on that, widely in support of the local plan. So the green belt is very well recognised and established now around Sheffield, which is wonderful. But working with other organisations such as the Sheffield Wildlife Trust as well, they have comments around biodiversity, species protection. They have an involvement in nature reserves and designated land around the city too. So it's interesting to see those organisations work together around that. There's various other projects and campaigns that have been underway. So we do talk about a frack-free South Yorkshire now. There have been campaigns against, exploratory applications for oil and gas drilling. So we watch and wait and see how that develops in coming times. There was an archive project. There's a lovely picture there of Ethel Haythornthwaite and her second husband Gerald. So CPRE has been the holder of the archive for the whole of the last really nearly 100 years. The charity and prior to that, the establishment of the National Park. Obviously, we share some of that with the Peak District National Park Authority, but now the majority of the archive is physically housed in the Sheffield Archives service under Sheffield City Council, but there is a digitised index which will be going online soon, I believe, which is wonderful. That hasn't been available before, so knowing exactly what's in the archive and some really wonderful things unearthed, including live film reels which people hadn't seen for many years, of Ethel doing her work, of some of the campaigning and events that were taking place, you know, quite a while ago now. Undergrounding is something that's been quite big as well, a big national collaboration really with CPRE, other organisations and the National Grid and various companies to take electricity infrastructure underground, and therefore protecting the scenery and the environment in various parts of the Peak District. So there's a nice piece of footage of the felling, you know, it's like a big tree coming down, the crashing down of one of the pylons quite recently, just a few months ago, over in the West Peak District around the Longdendale area. So that was great to see happening. So I must just give a little shout out, if it's okay, to our colleagues, staff and volunteers over in the CPRE Lancashire, Greater Manchester and Liverpool City Region branch, because I know that your jurisdiction, your area, your region really does cover, you know, Lancashire and right over to the west and the coast, which is great, really big area. So you've got Debbie there with the orange scarf. She's the current chair of that group and doing really wonderful things to engage people, to diversify the audiences and the support for CPRE, and, you know, get younger people involved, and lots of different ways to engage people in projects and campaigning for the countryside, and all that brings a huge area that they cover too. So they're doing really great work. So it wouldn't be right to talk about the work of CPRE in the Peak and Northern Footpath Society region without mentioning them. So a few personal photographs, just moving really into just thinking about who is out there walking. I've said besides me, but I'm going to say presumably yourselves as well. I'm sure, as David mentioned at the start, you know, you might be aware of the Peak District Boundary Walk. You'll certainly, I'm sure, be walking parts of the Peak District and beyond. I have done some stages of the Boundary Walk, not that many actually, but I do know, because I'm based in Sheffield, I live in Sheffield, I grew up in Castleton in the Hope Valley, so I know the Peak District and some of the edges, but for me, I think the Boundary Walk really has got something for everybody in those communities around the edges of the Peak District, showing people the lesser known places. And I think that has really become popular in the last few years as well, people looking for challenges to get out there, you know, not being able to travel much further afield during COVID times. Obviously, I think people were looking for things that were to be explored on their doorstep. So I'll move on to a few slides of other people doing the Boundary Walk, but just wanted to mention, because again, it wouldn't be right to talk about the work of CPRE without mentioning the Ethels. I don't know if anybody's heard of the Ethels. You probably have. Does anybody have the app on their phone? That seems to be the way to do it these days. The Ethels app was created by a chap, a great supporter of CPRE, Doug Colton, I think more than a year ago now. I can't remember exactly how old it is, but it's a series of hills. I say hills, I'm not sure if we're allowed to say mountains, but perhaps I could. Mountains across the Peak District that are over 400 metres, but a few other iconic locations in the Peak District have been included, such as Thorpe Cloud in the south near to Ilam, because they're iconic and beautiful, so they're worthy of being included. So there are 95 Ethels, and it is very much presented as a challenge for people to walk the Ethels and tick them off. In the background there, the height, the landscape in the background is Chelmorton Low, which is one of the Ethels, and it's not quite on the Boundary Walk, but it's visible from the route of the Boundary Walk. So that's stage one, going along out of Buxton, not too far from Buxton there. So So the Ethels is one to look out for. If you haven't heard from them, do look them up. It's been extremely popular. The app, we heard from Doug Colton, who produced the app and owns the technology around the app. And he's let us know that in total, there have been 28,000 downloads of the app. So people getting that app on their phone or device and, setting about walking to reach those points across the Peak District. So 11,000 just in the last 12 months, which is quite remarkable. Almost 1,000 people a month getting interested, which is fabulous. So that's the Ethels. That's a bit of a side note. I want to just highlight this family as well. This was a family that were public around their challenge of walking the whole of the Peak District boundary walk. They said to me that it was initially in 2020 a lockdown distraction. So husband and wife and young child. And in 2022, they completed the whole of the boundary walk. So, nearly 200 miles. I just thought that was such an incredible achievement. Great to see young people out walking, great to see a family doing something like that together. So we did send them a CPRE medal, a little metal medal and a certificate for that achievement. So yeah, that's the Rate family. I think they live over Buxton Hayfield Way, somewhere between the two. Catherine Crossley deserves a special mention. She was in touch with me last summer because she is a runner. She's part of the Macclesfield running group, and she was building up to her own personal challenge, which was to run the whole of the boundary walk in one go as fast as she possibly could. And I know the text is very small there, but she achieved that over the bank holiday weekend, the August bank holiday 2022. She was in touch with me just about, making sure that the route was accessible. There were one or two places where she was coming across impediments due to mainly vegetation, actually, which by the time of the walk, there was a field that got cut, which was lucky. So she completed over 3 days, nearly 4 days. It was 3 days, 11 hours, 21 minutes and 42 seconds. And again, I sent her a medal because I just thought it was almost superhuman, what she was doing. She had a support driver who drove a van to various locations to meet her so that she could have refreshment and, a little rest. She had a small amount of sleep, I'm told, over that weekend. But this is the screenshot I've taken there is from a website called Fastest Known Times. That's what the FKT stands for. So she now is the holder, as far as we know, of the fastest known time for a female running the Peak District boundary walk. So there is a website dedicated to just such things, and she was very delighted. I've stolen a few photographs with her permission from her website, her blog. She writes about every step of the way. She wrote a lovely detailed blog afterwards about how it was at each stage, running through the night, the highs and the lows, and just the wonderful support that she had from fellow runners and friends. So yeah, it's a nice story, and it's that sort of thing that I think really helps to raise awareness in different communities of interest, I would call it. Runners, okay, maybe not every runner would think of doing something of such a distance, but when somebody does, I think it really sparks people's interest, which is great. So that's Catherine. And so possibly moving into the more traditional, if I may say that, when I first started in this role last year and was really focusing on the boundary walk, it was clear that there are lots of different groups around with an interest in walking, ramblers groups, outdoor groups, obviously the LDWA area groups as well. So I think, David, you are on that picture, are you?
I don't like to admit it, but yes, I've got the green top on.
Yeah, shorts on. So yes, there was a nice write-up, which I think was online. I think you certainly sent it to me. Walking 50 miles of the Boundary Walk, Bollington to Old Glossop, which is several stages, and that was for the 50th anniversary of the South Manchester group. So again, I think this is what the Boundary Walk provides. You know, it is guided in the sense of being waymarked. It is using public rights of way, which technically anybody could join up themselves, but it's great that it's kind of been done for you and there's an accessible route to follow. So that's nice. I mentioned digital engagement. So it is, you know, one of the ways that people find out. It's one of the most common ways that people find their information these days. I mean, you can have the guidebook. Again, I'll mention the guidebook in a slide in a moment or two. But, you know, people are finding information on the website, promoting it via social media. So, you know, I'm making sure that I use images and references to CPRE and the Boundary Walk. It's a good tool for raising awareness of the charity. So colleagues I have in the charity also use Twitter and Instagram. I don't so much. And we can just reach more people that way, which is really important. It's not everything, but it is really important. But it does require time. You know, you will all know, because I'm sure you have emails and websites and things that you're perhaps involved in, or you use them to go and find information. And you want information that's really up to date, that is accurate. There's nothing more frustrating than a website you look at and either it hasn't got the date on and then you subsequently discover it's from something in 2018 or, you know, an event that's already happened. So it does require updating and refreshing. So that is a part of my job. And it does work well. It does work well. I have a Peak District Boundary Walk Facebook group. If any of you are Facebook users, it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it is very helpful from an organiser's point of view, in terms of getting some insight into who those users are, who those people are that are engaging with the Boundary Walk Facebook group. Doesn't mean they're necessarily out walking it, of course, but I like to think that at least a good percentage of them would be. So we have to be careful how we use this type of data, but we can get insights and analysis, such as the simple bar graph, which I've used on the screen, which shows us that out of that whole Boundary Walk Facebook group, out of those currently, well, very recently, 846 members, just over half are female, that's the blue line, and just under half are male, which is the green line. So as I say, it's not necessarily 100% certain that they are people that are out walking, but they're people that are certainly showing an interest. And a smaller number of those people are regular engagers, and they will post, like the picture that I've used there, Mike and Gordon. This is a couple of chaps who are regularly doing parts of the Boundary Walk, posting lovely photos, and they get some really nice engagement. Lots of people giving them a thumbs up and, you know, commenting on their wonderful images, and it just all helps to promote positive access to the countryside, positive use of the Boundary Walk. Equally, we do get issues reported. Again, I will touch on those in a moment. We can see that quite a proportion, it's not quite 1 in 8, maybe 1 in 7 of those Facebook group users are from the Sheffield area. Interestingly, that's something we've discovered about CPRE membership generally, actually. You know, we've got a good amount of supporters and members for our CPRE groups, paying members, subscribing members. Many of them are West Sheffield, East Peak District, rather than sort of Central Peak District, which is interesting. So, you know, it can help us to think about where we target and where we advertise, where the gaps might be. Why aren't people interested from, you know, Southwest Peak District? Can we do some promotion there? Can we put on an event there or offer something out to that group of people? So that's how we use the digital engagement side of things. Are there any questions? Is it worth a little pause, or shall I carry on? I can keep going.
There is one question about how much of the route is cyclable as opposed to walkable.
Gosh, that's a very good question. I can't answer that because I just don't know, but it is a really good question. I'm trying to think already of whether I'm aware of sections that in themselves are part of another trail that's cyclable. And I'm not sure. Yeah, that is a really good That's a mission. I shall possibly talk to my Sustrans peers. I've got, I know people who are kind of active in promoting the cycleways that Sustrans have in their jurisdiction. The bits I've walked, I'm going to say really not very much. Although there's obviously some road walking in places, but whether it ties into bigger cycleways, the ones I'm thinking of tend to be more into the heartland rather than the hinterland of the national park, I suppose. So the, Monsell Trail, the trailways, the Tissington Trail, things like that. But that's a really good question. Yeah, sorry not to be able to give a definitive answer. Open to answers on a postcard.
Yeah, actually, I'm just looking at the question again, Cassa, and it says, is there a cycling horse riding equivalent of the boundary walk? Which is a slightly different question, actually.
Yeah, it's similar but different, isn't it? Is there an equivalent? If you were to say true to the Peak District boundary, I would say probably not, but that's not to say that, certainly lengths of the boundary walk will be bridleway. Certainly I've walked on areas that are bridleways that are accessible by horse, not and bicycle, but not necessarily as part of a promoted cycle trail as such. So yeah, interesting question. This lady is Rosie. She's part of the team at Vertebrate Publishing, who are a Sheffield publishing company who specialise in, you can see on the shelves behind, they have a huge array of outdoor books promoting walking, climbing, cycling, adventure, all sorts of things. If you go on their website, they have a huge variety. They produced the Boundary Walk, and they are actually the main retailer of it. We do have a stock ourselves, but less and less are we actually going around physically selling the book. I did do an event in Longdendale last August, and I'd sold, I think it was 2 or 3 copies of the book. So I did have some with me, but we just don't have the resource or the time, really. I'm just 1 day a week at the moment in this role. So, but Vertebrate do all of that online, so you can buy the book directly from them online. They do push books to Amazon and promote that as well, so you can buy it via Amazon. And they are also in touch with the many stockists that we have. So some of the visitor centres, places like the Hassop, I can't think, Hassop bookstore at the Hassop roundabout, just on the Monsell Trail near Bakewell. We have stockists who they don't come to me, but they order directly when they want to restock. And I'm told I can't give you figures, but I'm told it sort of trickles out nicely. They do sell. It is popular. I think I have a little caveat around the guidebook, because it did have to be reprinted. So you can see my edition. I don't know if you can see that, but it has a green label on it, new edition. So that was November 2021. But already we know that aspects of the new guidebook will, or indeed already have, gone out of date. Almost, as soon as a book is published, you perhaps find things that change on the ground, temporary diversions, perhaps works that were going on at the time of publishing which have now finished. That's something that's cropped up in a couple of cases. Langsett Dam Wall was closed in 2021, but it no longer is. So yeah, how much time, how much investment, sort of money and time, do we put into constantly reproducing guidebooks? Is that wasteful if we find that, Vertebrate Publishing have 10,000 books still in stock at the time when you do a reprint? So, and a lot of people do use digital devices, GPX, apps on their phone. They're using digital methods to navigate and find their way. We currently don't have up-to-date GPX files for the Boundary Walk. We did for the original version of the book, but we don't have those currently. So I'm looking at possibly working with the University of Sheffield Geography Department. We're wanting to get a student who might do that work for us in terms of GIS, Geographical Information Systems Technology, so GPX files, mapping the route again for us digitally. I like a book, I have to say, so I will take a tatty copy out and it'll get wet and it'll get, rough around the edges. But I'm a bit like that. I'm a bit old school, although I do use Google Maps on the phone to find my own location, and I do use SatNav when I'm driving. So, I'm a bit in between. But I don't know how people feel. It's maybe something for afterwards, how do people feel about carrying guidebooks these days, or are people quite keen on the digital device? It's a very personal preference. But I do find that I am picking up, errors, diversions, perhaps issues just in translation, about how people perceive things on the ground as to how somebody else has described them when a book's being written. So yeah, that's our guidebook. So this is a little chunk of information which I recently published on the CPRE Peak District website, because we do get the odd query, not very many in my time, not very many in the last year, I have to say. If there was an issue with the right of way, accessibility, or a problem, vegetation that needed cutting back, it's unlikely to be myself or our footpath monitoring volunteers that would do that work. It did used to happen, I think, in the days when the boundary walk was first published. The vision was that there would be a whole team of people on the ground. Obviously, a lot of this refers back to yourselves, to the society, in that footpath inspector role, and monitoring. And I had a chat with David about this, and it works. There is a role for yourselves to play in reporting, and then liaising with the various landowners or bodies, whether that's an authority's public rights of way staff team, or somebody else, a landowner, private landowner, or another, again, national trust. It could be, thinking in the sort of West High Peak down in the south of the county. So that's currently what we say to people, is if there is an issue, yeah, it's helpful for me to know. I'm always wanting to be aware of where there are issues, so I can just help other people who make inquiries. Doug Colton is the chap who's also responsible for the new Path Checker app, which I know is on your website. So very much we're trying to link up the information and make sure that we're saying the right thing to people. Like I say, not too many issues. And I think because of the contact I've had with particularly Catherine in August, so as of August, I can say that, yeah, over a 3-day period, she was able to perfectly well access the whole of the Peak District boundary walk. But I know that changes season by season, and issues can crop up. So yeah, David and I also had a chat about whether there is potential crossover. Certainly some of the footpath inspectors amongst you, or amongst the society membership as a whole, will no doubt be walking bits of the boundary walk as well. So there is perhaps a join up that we can do there, thinking about cross-reporting issues along the way, and being aware that I'm here as a person who can sort of listen and take on those issues, even if I can't solve them. But being aware is the start of that. So that's probably about all there is to say on the kind of route itself. This is a lovely picture of a little event that we had last summer in Longdendale. There's something important, I think, about partnering with other people, because what you've got around the table here is Anne, one of our key transport campaigner volunteers. You've got a lady and a husband and wife team there who were running they ran a Heritage Lottery funded creative arts project around the Peak District boundary. And they were exploring people's kind of creative responses to the boundary. What does the concept of a boundary mean? What does it mean if you live one side of that boundary within the national park, and then on the other side of that boundary out of the national park? What does it mean for people's identities? And there were also a couple of people who were trained oral historians who had actually worked for, I think it was BBC over in Lancashire, Merseyside, doing kind of history recording, and they were there to record. So the chap right in the middle there, it looks like a fluffy owl or something on his knee, but it's not. It's actually a a microphone because we were recording the event and the discussions that people were having. And the chap in the bright green shirt, he was the National Park Authority ranger based at the Longdendale Environment Centre. So a real interesting little group of people coming together to share and engage with the concept of the boundary walk, not walking it, but talking about it, learning from each other, and having a bit of shared understanding about what the boundary means. It's perhaps something we don't think about very much, but that was a good one. So just a little bit then about the charity. I think this perhaps has relevance and resonance for yourselves, you know, people who are involved in running any society, small group, charity. These things are important: membership and communications, money, obviously, and I suppose I'm linking the work that I've been doing around the Peak District boundary into, you know, how can we use the boundary walk as a tool to make people aware of the charity, to help raise some money for the charity. It's not an obvious one, apart from obviously book sales, apart from events that you might go to and shake the tin at. It can be difficult. It can be really difficult. Volunteers, that's a key focus for myself. Like I outlined before, I've got a background in you know, how to get the best out of volunteering programs, how to motivate and sustain the interest of volunteers in a charity, recognizing that that's a donation of time and not money necessarily, but as equally important, you know, people on the ground, people supporting you, people advocating for you, spreading the good word about the work that we're all doing. So we have the 2024 centenary of CPRE Peak District and South Yorkshire. The national charity actually came later. The national CPRE charity was established fully in 2026 as the Council for the Preservation of Rural England, as it was then. And so we're building up towards that, and again thinking, how can we use the centenary celebrations to really raise awareness of the charity? I believe yourselves, you have an even bigger anniversary to mark. Is that right, David? I can't quite remember how many years you said, but
it'll be 130.
130. That's incredible. Yeah.
1894 we started.
Yeah, that's superb. Yeah, so, you know, using that to shout out and celebrate. So we'll be doing more. Watch this space. There will be some more events, and hopefully joint events with others, you know, possibly such as yourselves, where we can partner up and join together, use our resources wisely to you know, unite behind a common cause. This is the final slide, just to say that, you know, these are the places you can find out more. It's just off the back of the last slide, really. This is something that I weave into every communication that I make. My email signature has all of this information. It's giving people options to find out more about the charity. Join as a member, ask questions, phone up, email, get in touch. So, I mean, David, I don't know if you do send slides around to people afterwards, but I'm very happy to just send you this if that's helpful to be emailed around. I'm here for, you know, chatting to people, helping out, exploring ideas, answering questions, apart from tricky ones about cycleways around the boundary walk. But it's a really obvious question to ask. It's a really good one.
So thanks, Cassa. That was great. We've now got a much better idea about all the different ways that people are enjoying the boundary walk and about the work of CPRE. So thank you very much for being with Peak and Northern this evening, and good luck for the future. Good night.